All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. Let me just make sure that everything is a-okay with the feed. We are live. I see us here on
All right.
our feed, and we are ready to go. Great evening, great evening. I have a tendency, Suzanne, to call everyone superstars. So I am going to say good evening to all the superstars out there and all the mindset masters. I think I have just named you heard. And we're going to call them mindset masters out there. And I am super excited, to sit down with you this evening and have this conversation, right? So I know we have been in conversation all week in regards to the topic why I was deathly afraid to speak. And I've heard you share your story, but I'm super excited that I have the opportunity to go a little bit deeper with you this evening in that conversation. So I see that Deneen is out there. Great evening, Deneen. How are you? Thank you so much for jumping on and joining. And if you are out there and you're watching us, my name is Taria Hodge, a social media strategist and founder of Social Media Saturdays. And I have the privilege to interview the Mindset Mastery Mentor, my Mindset Mastery Mentor, Susan Hart. And we're, like I said, super excited to have a very powerful conversation. So the first thing that I'm going to ask for everyone to do before we get started is to go ahead and take a minute to share out this broadcast. Okay. So look below the video, you're going to see the share button. Just take a minute and go ahead and share this broadcast out. You might want to share it on your timeline because, like I said, we're about to have a very explosive, conversation about the things that we see happening and what's going on and why it's so important to find your voice and to have a voice and let your voice be heard. So that's what we are talking about this evening. Okay. So make sure you take a minute to share it on your timeline. For those of you who are out there, if you are managing communities, I know I definitely shared it inside of my Social Media Saturdays community. If you have a community or you have a network online, okay, of people who definitely want to be in on this conversation, or they might be asking some questions about what are some of the things that they can do at this time, you definitely want to take a minute to share this out. Okay. And then also, Anila said she has done it. She has shared. Thank you so much, Anila, for doing that. Fazia is out there. Welcome, Fazia. Thank you so much for jumping on and joining. And then I see, I don't want to butcher the first name. So I'm going to say the last name is Mr. Kolowski. So thank you, Mr. Kolowski, for jumping on
Oh,
and
it's out
joining.
there. Yay.
Yes, thank you so much for jumping on and joining. And then also, I want everyone to do me a favor. This is another thing that when I do interviews and I do Facebook Lives, I always like to know where people are watching from. Okay. So before we get started, just do me a huge favor, do us a huge favor, and go ahead and put what city and state you are watching from this evening. Okay. And without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started. So, like I mentioned, Suzanne, we have been in conversations. We're always in conversations, right? And one of the things that I've noticed that we've actually done very well, pretty well this week, is go deeper, into the conversation about why speaking and knowing your voice and finding your voice and letting your voice be heard is so important. And I was, kind of excited, truth be told, when I saw your title. And your title is Why Was I Deathly Afraid to Speak? Now, I've heard you, tell bits and pieces of this story from the stage, but tonight I'm very interested to go a little bit deeper and hear the full side of your story. So first, I'm going to ask you, why were you deathly afraid to speak?
That is a loaded question, Taria. And it's loaded particularly because of the time you're in. And you know what's really beautiful about this? Taria is my social media strategist, and thank you so much for hosting this evening. She's giving me some leeway to stay focused on the conversation. So, we chose this topic probably 2-3 weeks ago. And we were in the coronavirus, we were talking about a speaking event, and then all this stuff started to unfold, and the death of George Floyd, and so many things happening. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go through the story and tell you why I was deathly afraid to speak, but also why it was so important that I found my voice, and why it will never, ever, let me underline, ever be silenced again, because this is a time where each of us are going to be called to speak. And so as I tell the story, I have been back and forth on how to tell the story, how much of the story to tell. So we're gonna jump in because there's so much in this story that's so relevant to today. So for those of you who don't know, as you know, my name is Suzanne Hart. I'm the Mindset Mastery Mentor, but way back when, I was a little girl who immigrated from the island of Trinidad. My mother brought me and my sister here at the age, I was 5, my sister was 9, and she brought us here for better, for more, as most parents who immigrate to another country do. That's what they're looking for their children. And I'll tell you, the moment I arrived, I remember asking my mom, where are all the people that look like me? And imagine being a mom trying to explain that. And she was like, well, they don't live, all of them live here. They live, back home. And she was trying to do her best to explain the situation. But that was just my notice. It was a difference, but that's all it was. It was a difference. There was no one around me that looked like me. So we move, we get settled in. They don't let me start because I'm from a quote third world country. So I've got to be held back, all the stuff that most people who immigrate to North America understand. So then I get to go to kindergarten. Now the caveat is I've already been in school in Trinidad for, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years. I can read some, I can do some math. I'm advanced. So kindergarten is like play for me. Okay. And I go to school. I'm the only Black child in my classroom, and all's good. All's good. I go to school, go back, I'm making friends, so on and so forth. Then I get into my next year of school. And in my next year of school, Taria, we are now in a more formal classroom. And I remember the day, like I remember it distinctly. I remember the question. I shouldn't say I remember the day. And the question was, who would like to read? And I put up my hand because I was an enthusiastic kid. I put up my hand straight up. You know that put up your hand when you're like, please choose me. I want to do this. So I put my hand up like that. And I remember the teacher inviting me up to the front of the room. And I got my book, and it's the book that we've all read, Spot chases the ball, dot, that book. So yes. I start reading. Now I know the words, and I am reading. And my teacher stops me and she says, Suzanne, that's not the way we pronounce those words. And you can imagine the confusion on my face because I'm thinking that's the way we pronounce those words. And I can't figure it out because I'm young. I'm a little girl. So I continue to read. And once again, she says, Suzanne, that's not the way we pronounce the words. And she's really meaning that's not the way we talk here. And I
imagine you're referring to your accent.
She's referring to my very Trini, twang, sing-song accent, right? So she's referring to that. And I am perplexed because, when you listen to yourself, all sounds normal. So I continue to read. And it's like telling someone from Australia to sound like they're from America. That's really what it is. And I can't figure it out. So I continue to read. And now the kids are starting to snicker. And now the kids are starting to laugh. And now the kids are starting to giggle. And she keeps me up here. And I've got to finish these pages. I am embarrassed and I'm fighting tears, and you can hear the rumbling, and that there's something going on, but I can't quite get it. And in that moment, a little girl decides, never again will I ever speak in public. Never again will I put myself out and ever be, I don't know what vulnerable means as a little girl, but that's what I was thinking. And I decide that it's not safe, and my difference is not a good thing. All of that in a moment is decided. Now, 2 things happen. I go through all my years of education, and I am the child the young woman, the girl who never raises her hand in class. I could be confused. I could not know the answer. I will figure it out later, but I will not risk raising my hand ever again to be that humiliated. That goes on till the age of 35, Turia.
Wow.
I have held positions, jobs. I have been in management. You could not get me to present to more than, I'd have to check you out, figure out I trust you, do all that stuff. So I would present to my team. But if you said, my boss would go, Suzanne, I want you to go. And I'd say, no, no, I'm the behind the scenes girl. I make you look good. I'm not going out there. And my last boss would be, but Suzanne, you know, you've got some, nope, no way. But roll back to after that day in the classroom, what begins to ensue is I begin to be held after class. I begin to be held in at lunchtime because I got to fix the way I talk, apparently. And so there's I get up to the front of the room. It's not good enough. I get held after class. I get up to the front of the room. It's not good enough. I get held at class. So I'm constantly getting sent to lunch with the bigger kids.
Wow.
I'm a little girl. They start to harass me. And then I become the target on the playground. And then I become the target, period. And I get picked on, things thrown at me, name called, all related suddenly to the color of my skin. Now understand, I've been a year with these kids, nothing, and I want you guys to get this. No one has had an issue. And so this ensues to the point where I would leave and go to school late just to miss the walk-in. I would stay later just to miss the crowd going home. I got to the point where I was deathly afraid of going to school. So I actually failed grade 1.
Wow.
I failed grade 1, according to my teacher. Now, if my mother wasn't my mother, and my Cindy's probably watching going, yeah, if my mother was my mother, because my mother marched up into that school and she was, I don't know what's going on here, but my daughter can read. So I actually failed grade 1, but in that year, it is just at it. And then one day, I come home crying and I am at my wit's end. And I want you guys to get this. My mother says, honey, you're going to have to defend yourself. Can you imagine telling your little girl that?
Yeah.
You were going to have, now I don't fight. I've never fought before. I've never fought since.
I was just about to say, so that's what Caribbean parents do, right? Like at some point, you're going to have to take a stand for yourself, and you're going to have to stand up, right? So I'm super excited to ask you, so what happened next?
So, and you know, and I, you know, as I'm an adult, I'm thinking, my mother's probably thinking, I can't follow her around, not moving. I have to help her figure this out. So I go back to school, pure terror, pure whatever, and I get into the fight of my life. Fight. A little girl. I'm like, if I'm 50 pounds soaking wet, I get into this fight of my life. And I end up beating up this kid. And then they throw me in detention and have the nerve to call my mother. And my mother's like, what? She's in where? And my mom's like, oh, well. And my mother was basically, she will defend herself. Until. So next year, so this grade finishes, I go into my next grade, which is really interesting. Change of teachers. Everything stops.
Very interesting.
Change of teachers, everything stops. I go from the kid who almost fails to a kid who's straight A. Everything stops. Now, one is I fought my way to like, don't mess with me. But two is the power dynamic shifted and everything stopped. And the reason I think this story is so key right now, Turia, it's as soon as the power dynamic shifted, everything stopped. And part of why I wanted to tell the story is I want to unpack it and draw a parallel process to where we are today.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, as I'm sitting here and you know, listening to you share the story, in my mind, so many questions, so many things, are like running through my mind, right? So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, number one, and you said it was the shift of the power dynamic shifted, right? But what was one of the things as you noticed that shift in power? What was one of the big learns for you coming through that?
I think, and I didn't figure this out till hindsight, right? As I'm older and I'm understanding and I'm maturing. But one of the interesting things was, and for everyone listening, when I was in the grade, and I'm trying to say not great what grade it is, because everybody who lives there will go, I know the teacher, right? So when I was in that grade, teachers have power,
Mm,
right? They have power and they have title, positional power.
hmm.
And so someone decided to use their positional power to express their bias. Now, bias becomes racism when you have institutional power and you
Yeah,
have positional power. And I really want everyone to get this. So the parallel between what's going on right now and this classroom was the people in authority are not being responsible with difference.
yeah,
And so they're putting things out there that are giving permission for people who look different, sound different, are different to be marginalized and potentially abused, right? So for me, what happened was the dynamic of that classroom was that because the person with positional power chose to identify a child who didn't look and sound like everybody else and decide her difference is not good. And because I don't like her difference and I have the power
yeah.
to sway the group, I will do so. Now, whether this is intentional or not is actually irrelevant because that's what institutionalized racism is when the power dynamics are in such a way that you have the power to impose your belief on a group and the institution supports it. Now, when I say the institution supports it, what is also interesting is the lunch people saw it. The people on the playground saw it. Every child saw it. Everybody saw it. And nothing was said, nothing was done.
Wow.
And so that is when you have the dynamics of power that is institutionalized and also pervasive. And when I say institutionalized, I'm talking church, state, government, schools, you name it, it's part of the social structure.
Hmm.
And when it's part of the social structure, the tendency is not to question it.
I'm getting ready to jump in, right? Because the story that you're sharing, is such a powerful analogy because when we actually line it up with the things that are occurring and the things that are happening today, we could clearly see, right, the positional power. People who have that position, they have that title. It comes along with the job, right? And how do you use or misuse that
Absolutely.
power? Okay.
Absolutely.
And like I said, I'm just looking at all of the events and I'm watching and I'm watching and I'm not just watching, the key players in the incident. Okay. I'm watching how we're reacting, as a nation, how we're
Absolutely.
reacting, as a people. And I'm taking a look at, those people who have the titles and who have the power. Okay. And so one of the things that stands out for me, and especially when we flush this out, is the silence.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not until you break the silence. So,
Absolutely.
so if you are in position and you do have that power can be used both ways, because you
Absolutely.
just said a key word. The key word that you said was influence. So you do have influence. You know, you do have people who listen to you. You have people who respect, you know, your position. Okay.
Hmm.
So how do you break that silence? Okay. And use the influence and the power that you have to affect change. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad that you know, drew that parallel, you know, thought in there with the position, the power. And I know one of the things that we talked, you know, more about this week is the understanding of privilege. Okay.
Absolutely.
And how, you know, because that's another thing that we have heard more and more so coming through this week, right? Privilege, the privilege. And it's not, but do we really understand, you know, what privilege is? Do we know what privilege is? And do we get what it is and what it
And,
stands for?
and I think that was what created the silence. That was what created the, although people were witnessing the dynamic, there's a tendency to say, well, I'm not getting involved in that. I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to touch that. And you know, it's interesting because even now, I remember the lunch monitor, her discomfort in being in the space and watching this stuff occur. And you could tell that she felt she knew the wrong, but
Mm.
it wasn't really affecting her and it wasn't affecting her children, but she was uneasy in it. And I want to ask everybody, how many of you have seen something and you're uneasy in it because intuitively and your humanity
Yeah.
knows this isn't right, but your the power dynamics, because what we're faced with is, do I rock the boat?
Mm-hmm.
Do I speak out? Do I risk losing this and losing that? And so there is silence. I think the other thing about privilege is I describe privilege like air, or
Mm-hmm.
it's like air, right? And if you've always had air to breathe, like we all have, you don't you take it for granted. But you know, if you go out of your house and you're like just breathing the air, it's cool. But there's some people who go out of their house and they're holding their breath. The air's not the same. And that analogy is, you know, if every time you walk into a store, every time I cross the border, people joke, I'm like, I hold my breath because I don't know what they're gonna ask me today. And I always joke because when I cross the border with my white friends, I'm like, I'm good. I'm gonna lay back here and kick back because I'm with you. They're not gonna stop us.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you be hanging out with, right? And so that is the dynamic of privilege. Is I walk with the fear of the historic perspective, and my white friends, they walk with privilege. And I'm not saying it to good or bad. I want people to just get it is what it is. And it's such a fabric of our society that it is like air. And unless someone has had you have a situation where they've taken your air and they've taken your breath and they stopped you and your heart is racing, it's hard to understand. And so I think what, you know, one of the things I'll talk about as we go further into the interview is the difference between having to understand it and being compassionate and empathetic about it. Um, you know, one of the things I think is really interesting about this dynamic, Turia, was that, you know, um, I want to talk about the fight for a moment.
That was going to be my next question for you. So tell us about the fight and what did it represent as we take a look at, or matter of fact,
Humanity.
as you just go through life and you reflected back on that, right? What were some of the lessons and what did that represent for you?
Well, first of all, I don't actually remember the fight. I knew I fought. I don't remember it. Fear, pure
Okay.
fear, pure fear. But this is the interesting thing about the fight. To me, if we, and I wanted to talk about this because I wanted to draw parallels, right? I have never fought before, and I've not fought since that period of time because first of all, I have a different maturity and emotional mastery, if you will, but I've not had a reason to. But this is the interesting thing. The fight was the frustration and the fear and the belief that no one cared enough about this little girl, that she had to come out swinging for her life. And so, why that is so important is because we see the rioting,
Yeah.
and we see the looting, and I don't condone it in any way. But I want to create the analogy of what happens when you are attempting to be heard, attempting to be heard, saying, please make this equal, please stop, and you're not heard. Emotions are so palpable, and it's just one more time. And my fight was just not. I didn't have one more time left in me to go through what I was going through, and so I understand it, but I don't condone it because and I want to get people to get this. I was like 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
My emotional maturity was not at the place it is today. My understanding is not at the place today. And the level of responsibility that I walk with is not the same. So I'm not walking through a world with the emotional reaction of a young little girl. And I really want to speak to that because it's easy to say, we're frustrated and we're angry. I get it, been there, and I'm a Black woman, I understand it. But at the same time, the ask is more, what do we do to move this conversation forward? And anger and frustration and looting and damaging is not what's going to move things forward.
Yeah.
Protesting, totally get.
So it's like I definitely understand because coming through this week, um, I have 3 kids, and I think all 3 of them, I have a son and 2 girls. All 3 of them have different perspectives of, what's happening, right? And that's the thing. When we sit and we look at the writing, as a parent, how do you, explain that? And I found myself, saying the same thing, to my children. Like, no way do I condone rioting and going into your own neighborhoods and destroying your own stuff, right? But I have to be completely honest. There's this part of me that felt or feels, because I still feel this way, that if those actions weren't taken, right, then the attention would not have been given. So once again, it would have been the same thing where, like you said, you're pleading, please stop, please stop. And people are looking and they could say, oh, wow, that's wrong, but nothing changes, nothing shifts, right? And so now I think what we're seeing is the needle, moving forward. What I'm excited to see that's happening now is more conversations in the marketplace, right? And more conversation from the other side. I'm excited to see how, they're being vocal and how they're standing up, because that's the thing, right? The thing
Mm-hmm.
is, like, and I'm just going to say it, and I hope I just don't ruin the whole platform, but it's problem for, them to fix. And so they have to fix it. So this is the beginning stages, right, of getting to the point of taking a look at it and first admitting that there is a problem and speaking out to it so they can know how to address it. But I love that you talked about emotional intelligence, because I think that that's so key, right? So, and I'm just going to tie it back into your story. So, how did you, over the years, learn to develop emotional intelligence? Being able to make those sound decisions, right, and come into the place where you don't always have to destroy stuff or beat people up to be heard.
Well,
Okay.
Well, before we go there, there's a few things I want to point out in the story, because it was the beginning of my emotional intelligence. So a few things that were really paramount that happened. So that year comes to a close. I have my fight, so on and so forth. And I think I shocked as many people as I was shocked. And I spent, the rest of the year in detention, which was kind of safe, so it was all cool. But then I go into the next year, and I remember I said the power dynamics shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want you guys to get this, because I had another teacher who saw my difference as beauty. She saw my difference as interesting. She saw my difference as inclusive. And because the dynamic shifted, it shifted all the kids. And what's interesting is I have overnighted, hung out, grew up with that same group of kids and have had no issues before. And really what I want people to get is that racism and every ism we have is a socialized process, right? So those kids did not see my difference as bad or anything. They just saw me as different. We played together. Yeah. And as soon as someone in authority said this difference is a reason to exclude, name call, do all these things, poke fun at, the dynamic shift. And as soon as the power dynamic shifted again, and there was someone in authority who had no tolerance and did not see my difference as a bad thing, dynamic shifted back.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting was the same boy I had a fight with, we became great friends. Mm-hmm. And this is where the beginning began, because the teacher saw my skin color and she heard my accent and she saw the difference in my hair. That's it. There was not a period of time where she got to know me. There was not a period of time where she got to understand me. There was not a period of time where she broke bread with me. There was not a period of time where she inquired anything. Teacher number 2 took me out, had lunch with me, got to know me, asked questions. She was curious about what was the difference and how could she help me adjust. And then my next year teacher, straight A's again, same dynamic. Because you see, the learn for me was that when we see our difference as interesting, as beauty, as possibility, it shifts the dynamic. So, and let me tell you, all the teachers in my school at that point was white. We were the only Black family in our town at that point, and then another family moved in eventually. But for the longest time, my sister and I were it. And so what was interesting was as people got to know us, barriers began to break down. Mm-hmm. As people began to break bread with us, barriers began to break down. Now, I know Cindy's listening, and I've known Cindy since probably I was 10 years old. Cindy's my college roommate. She was my bridesmaid. She's my closest friend. She's my best friend. We do everything together. But the reason that has cultivated is she spent time at my house growing up. I've spent time at her house growing up. Our parents got to know each other. And I think what was the coolest thing where we were intrigued by each other's differences. She was like, I want to know about your music. I want to know about this. We did things together and the barriers began to break down. And then difference became interesting.
Yeah.
Right? It just became interesting. It became a place for us to revel. And she calls me the Black Queen. I love it. Right? She's called me that since we have been, I can't even remember when it started. And so, but she's we have totally embraced each other's difference. Why is that key? Because that was the first aha for me, right? Was that breaking down barriers is, you ask people. I had someone, just reach out to me today. I've known this person for the longest time. And she said, I've known you forever, but I've never invited you to break bread. And she said, and she says, it's all that's going on right now. Then she realized why didn't I know how? Right? Why didn't I know how? because we are socialized into polarization. We are socialized into to go stick to our own groups and stay in our own corners, because to get close to one another is dangerous. Not really, unless the social construct decides it is.
You
And
know, oh, no, go ahead.
go.
You know, I'm sitting here and I'm listening, and in my mind, I'm going back to, and I'm thinking about, my very own experience, right? So I grew up here in the Virgin Islands. I'm currently in the Virgin Islands now, where, predominantly Black, and actually it's like kind of, if you could just imagine, is the opposite, right? So if we do have, white children, they're few, they're sprinkled in between. So racism wasn't a big thing. Like, I did not experience that until I actually came, to the United States, right? And I came at the age of 17. And I remember clearly, I could still remember vividly my first experience when it was, in my face. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is, yeah, I was just like, oh, this is really a thing. And to be honest, my thought was, I read about this, right, in history books. And so that's one of the things that we talked about. So how important is it, for us as a people to educate ourselves, and know our history. And then, like I said, also there's work to be done on the other side too, where education is needed as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you, or what would you say is your suggestion on how that process should?
so so I want to start by just stepping back a little bit, because when we say us and them, they have to work on, we have to work on, us and them. That is the game that we're socialized to play.
Mm,
And it's a dangerous game, because it polarizes us, and
mm,
it puts people in different camps, and it separates us from our humanity. So these are the interests. These are the things I want people to kind of think of. If you think of me as a Black woman, that's just one dynamic. You're thinking of me in relation to the color of my skin. But if you think of me of a woman that was born in Trinidad, who immigrated to Canada, who grew up in French Canadian Canada in a French Canadian culture, who has 3 boys, who is an athlete, who has a background in social services, who is, you now get the texture of the complexity of who I am. What we are conditioned to do is go black, white. That is so surface that we actually aren't taking the time to see the layers and the beauties of each individual person. So part of me, for the purpose of this conversation, I want to say that yes, this is a conversation where it's race, but it's a bigger conversation about humanity, our humanity as individuals. Because every time we get caught in just those polarization discussions, we go to our perspective corners and we say, they got to change, they got to change, they got to change, they got to change. The dynamics of racism impact all of us. And so you asked me, how did I start to change? Well, institutionalized racism, getting educated in the institutions of North America, comes with a lens that is filtered by the dynamics of race. It cannot be. So I want you guys to get this. I'm educated within that lens, and so is every white person, brown person, so on and so forth. What that does is it gives us a lens to which we see the world. And so with doing that, as a woman, I had to go fill myself up with information that fortified a definition of Suzanne that was not defined by the institutions to which I grew up and was educated in. So I was blessed that when I was going through university, college in the US, that I had 4 amazing Black mentors that poured into me like you would not believe. So they were like, okay, we're going to take you everywhere to learn Black history. And Black history didn't start with slavery. It started way back here. And they taught me about kings and queens and this. They taught me about urban studies. And they said, if you want to get ahead in this world, you got to learn urban studies. You got to understand the migration of different races. Then they took me into cultural competency. They said, you know, we are not the only group that got oppressed. You got to learn about the Jews. You got to learn about the Asians. You got to learn about the Greeks. You got to learn about these. Every group that has ever immigrated to North America has experienced some form of marginalization and oppression. And immigration only lets you into a country so far. So they started pouring into me. And what that did was it strengthened Suzanne. So you can call me whatever you want. It's going to bounce off. It may annoy me, but it's not going to define me because I've defined myself. So that's the first thing. And I'm not saying to just only be a Black woman that does it. I'm saying Black women, Black men, Asian women, whoever you are that's listening, the first thing that we are all responsible for is to define who we are in the world and to fortify ourselves. Because without it, you're prone to racism. Because if you are not strong in your own identity, you're instantly threatened. And I want you guys to get this, because if I don't love me, I'm going to see all the flaws and all the biases and all the reasons not to love someone else. So I've got to define myself in such a powerful way that, you know what, as far as who I am, I'm 10 feet tall and bulletproof, thanks to 4 amazing mentors. So that's the first thing that we all are required to do. I think the second thing that we're required to do is to begin to develop critical thinking. You know, Napoleon Hill, Outwitting the Devil, everybody knows, one of my favorite books. I was like, this book is on. But what is beautiful about that is he talks about the institutionalized brain, I'm gonna say it, brainwashing, propaganda, all the stuff. And every culture has some of it. Like every organization has, that's how we create our cultures. But we are going to be required to assess what cultures and what institutions we endorse and how we play that game. Because what's happening is, as society, we are part of institutional structures and we're not using our critical thinking to say, okay, does this really make sense? Does this make sense? Does this align with my values? Do I want to be a part of that? And it isn't until each and every one of us becomes responsible for our thoughts and our actions that we're going to start to say, okay, because this is also about personal responsibility. I can't just be a part of an institution and endorse the pieces if it doesn't land properly with my values. And so I think that's the second part. The third part, this is economics and power. And that's a whole other lie. But this is economics and power. And, you know, so for me, one of the best things that my mentors did for me was they said to me, Suzanne, if you're going to be in a position of leadership, you have to understand the dynamics of power and privilege, oppression and marginalization. Because they said to me, if you don't understand the dynamics of power and privilege, you will abuse it. I want you guys to get this. Because we all have the opportunity to be oppressors, and almost every one of us has been oppressed in some way. So if we don't understand the dynamics of oppression, and we are in a machine that is based on institutionalizing difference as good or bad, we're going to just drift into it. So part of it is we are required to educate ourselves. It's no longer okay to say, I don't know, I don't really get it, right? Because we've all had the experience of racism. We've all had the emotion of racism. We've all had the emotion of bias, privilege, stereotype, all those different things. But have we educated ourselves to begin to pull it apart so we can begin to understand it, so we can make powerful decisions as individuals as to how we're going to play in this game? So that's my third point. My fourth one is our humanity. Okay, it is our humanity. And I want to put 2 analogies on the table. One is, if you go, I like our culture is made up of all sorts of different foods: Italian, French, Chinese, Japanese, West Indian, African. It is the richness of our North America. We love all sorts of different musics. It is the richness of this thing. So we embrace what difference brings to the table, but we can't embrace the source of difference. You guys get this? So I can love all the things that come from different cultures, races, and groups, but I can't endorse, I can't be with them. And I'm putting that analogy on the table because for me, it's that simplistic. Is if I can embrace everything that you bring to the table, and let me tell you, our different cultures and experiences bring a lot to the American culture. North American, South, like North America, Canada, US, it brings a lot to the table. So if we're going to take that, we've got to be willing to embrace the people who bring it to us, one. And the reason we don't is we're not socialized to see each other's humanity. We are socialized to see each other's difference. We're not socialized to go beyond difference and actually understand the human experience of the other person. So, and this is where the rubber hits the road, and this is as simplistic as it gets to Suzanne. When I watched that video, and it took me a long time to watch, I heard it was circulating. It took me a moment because I knew I was going to get pissed off. It's going to take me like 5 days to come out and be social again. So, but when I finally watched the video, this is a question that we all must ask ourselves from a human place. If this was my mother, my brother, my sister, my cousin, anyone I love and care deeply, deeply about, would it be okay? That's the only question that can be asked. If the answer is no, it's not okay, then we all have a responsibility to speak and act. If you remain silent, you are complicit.
Yeah.
If you say, yeah, it's okay for that person, but not for me, you've just participated in the dehumanization of another person. And you have participated in the process of saying my life is way more valuable than this human's life. You have participated in the process of equating a man to a footstool, as this gentleman did, as he kneeled on him, and not seeing the humanity of that person. So we are all being asked to ask ourselves really simple questions. Could this happen to someone I love? And me say, yeah, that's good. Because if the answer is no, we must protest. We must talk. We must speak. And we must let our voices be heard. And I started, why was I deathly afraid to speak? Because of an incident that was based on the race of my skin. Why do I speak now? Because no one is ever going to silence my voice again, ever.
You know, as you talked about the video, one of the things that I was kind of able to see, like in the video, like the representation, right, of like everyone. So there's like 3 roles that happen, right? And I don't know how many people actually, you know, saw this or see it through this lens, but that's going to be the challenge that I'm going to put out there, right? Is to just take a look at the roles and then know, you know, number one, which role do you normally play, and then why it's so important, you know, to speak. So first role, there's a role of the perpetrator, right? The person who's committing the act. Okay, so it's very clear. We know who that is. Okay, then there's the role of the 2 other officers who are holding him down. So those are the people who are aiding and abetting. So how many times, right, do you see something, right, and you're facilitating the process, but you want to, you know, find solace and comfort and say, well, I'm not the one doing it. I did not do it, right? But you're facilitating the process, okay? And then you have the role of the person who just stands with their back turned.
Mm-hmm.
They're fully aware of what's going on, but they're ignoring,
Absolutely.
and they're acting like it's not happening. Okay. And so when I take a look, at that, once again, that was my charge on the inside. This goes way beyond, race. It's not a black and white issue, it's a human issue. Okay. It's a human issue. So, how can you, as a human, right, um, just be a part of that? Commit that, be a part of it, whatever your role is. I just outlined the 3 roles that I saw.
Yeah.
Okay. And just be okay with it. It's not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay. And I think the blessing of what we're seeing is we're seeing people who are now beginning to say, this is a human issue and I must speak.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're seeing people you're seeing officers that are kneeling and not getting enough coverage as far as I'm concerned, because that's a stance and that's a risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're seeing people that are protesting, and you're seeing people walking side by side. And why I wanted to speak was, we don't want to just walk by side when we're rallying, right? And when we're marching and we're protesting. We don't want to walk side by side, because the emotions are going to die down and people are going to go back to their whatever that normal is going to look like. And what we're really going to be challenged with is, are we going to keep marching side by side?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to be able to open our doors and speak with each other? Are we going to be able to go beyond the color of the skin and say, I want to know the different layers of this person? Are we going to be able to do that? Are we going to be able to say that is wrong and I can't stand for that? And it's the smallest things, because remember, the incident I talked about as a little girl started with just being asked to stand in front of the room and read, right? Did the teacher know the catalyst she was igniting? Maybe or maybe not. But for some reason, she proceeded to do it day after day after day after day for a year, like I was going to lose my accent overnight, right? And so part of it is being able to see something and say, no, that's not right. I can't agree with that. I can't condone that. I know it's not affecting me, but I'm not going to turn my back. No. And we've got to be able to do it for each other, no matter, and not a race thing, but a right or wrong thing, a human thing.
Human thing. That's the way you look at it.
Right? And it is going to require that we step into a place of vulnerability that we've not been for many people. Because you know what? You're going to reach out and be vulnerable, and somebody's going to just be that exact stereotype that you expected. And you'll be like, darn, that Suzanne Hart, she told me to be vulnerable and step out and look, right? This person exactly like the stereotype. But then you're going to meet 10 other people that are going to be vulnerable, and you're going to say, look at this, the richness of what's possible. But we're all going to be required to put our biases and stereotypes down. And I want to tell everybody, we all have them. I have them, everybody has them, right? Just because your bias isn't got power, that makes it an ism, doesn't mean it's not there. We all walk with some impact of institutionalized racism. We all do. And so, and as a result, we interact with each other from that place. We're going to have to be vulnerable enough to put that down and say, you know what? Yeah, that was our education, but we gotta go and sit outside of that. We got to get curious, and we've got to educate ourselves. Yeah. When I started reading history, I was blown away, appalled at what I learned in school. I was like, man, my mother, when I came home after my first year of history, I was like militant. My mother was like, what happened to my child? Because I was just so, because of the little bit that I was taught and the so much rich of texture of all the other stuff, I didn't see myself represented in the history classes, but I didn't see anyone else represented either. And to find out that all this was there, I was incensed. I was militant. It was, yeah, it was, ooh, that was a phase.
You had the afro with the pick in it.
Oh, you know, and so, but evolution, more education, more education, more education, to a place where I can have conversations that allow me to look at bigger pictures and not allow my emotions to run me. Because right, you know, it took a moment. I was like, I know I can't post, I can't write, I can't do anything. I gotta sit at home and simmer so that I can get on and hopefully put forward a dialogue that moves that conversation forward. So if this serves, please send some love, send some
Oh yeah,
something.
you are getting love. Karen is saying that she had to jump off, but she's super excited and grateful that we hosted the conversation this evening. So thank you, Karen, for jumping on. Cindy's out there watching. Yetta is out there watching. Embracing our differences is best, and I love that you talked about that, Suzanne, bridging the gap of difference, right? So that's going to be my biggest takeaway that I leave from this conversation tonight is, looking for more ways where we just bridge the gap of differences. And like you said, we all carry biases, right, in some form or the other, but it's to stop, take pause, right, and look for that common ground of where we could seek understanding and move from a place of love. So Yetta is saying loving the conversation. So yeah.
Yeah. And I am hopeful in these times. I think that it's interesting to see the people that are standing up.
Mm-hmm.
All groups. I had the most beautiful conversation from a woman from Austria this morning, and she was like, I need my voice to be heard. She's in Austria.
Yeah.
And she's like, I need my voice to be heard because this is not okay. She goes, I will come on and have a conversation with you because I just need to take a stance and say, I live across the globe and I'm watching and this is not okay. And I have a group of people that were just like, this is not okay. And so I think we're at this place, if we all seize the moment, and it's not the Black community seizing the moment, it's not the white community seizing the moment, it's everybody seizing the
Everyone.
moment
Yeah.
and doing our piece in the equation. And it's a big, messy, complicated equation. But I think it comes down to, we have, when one of the things I tell people is when people tell me I don't see color, I know they're trying to compliment me and say, I love everybody. And I get it. But what I want to really invite people to see is to see the beauty in our differences. Mm. There's beauty in my color. There's beauty in the difference in my hair. There's beauty in my culture. There's beauty in my Africanness. There's beauty in my West Indianness. And there's beauty in the French Canadian part of me that I co-opted when I moved to this country. And all of those complexities make me who I am. When I did my race relations training, I was trained by a woman by the name of Elizabeth Hansard Fleet Lowe, and I'll close with this. And she said, we are going to be charged with allowing people to self-identify. And it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And she said, we're going to be charged when we ask people, who are you? Mm-hmm. Who are you? And listen to the layering of who they are. And not assume that what you see on the surface is all they are. Yeah. It's to listen to the layering. And so when you ask people, is to be curious about who are they really. Because if some time was taken to ask that man, who is he really? And what was going on? And let's get an understanding of the bigger situation. we might be in a different place.
Yeah.
But he wasn't asked, who are you really and what is truly your situation? That's what we're going to be. That's what I'm going to leave you with.
Yeah. And that's so powerful. So thank you for that. Thank you. This has been amazing. You know, me too. I don't think of, and it's terrible to say this as a social media strategist, but I think today was the first time for the week that I made a post, right? Because I've just been watching and wanting to say, but not know what to say. And the biggest thing that I thought about today was, oh my gosh, imagine once again the analogy of 2020, right? So 2020 stands for perfect vision. And who knew that this year would really bring so much clarity? And when I say clarity, it's clarity of taking a look at all of the, once again, the underlying issues, the things that are silent about, right? Bringing them to the forefront and having more people open up and break the silence to have the conversation, which is the first step in affecting the change that we desire. So thank you so much for just coming on and sharing and breaking your silence, you know, around the events and sharing your story on a deeper level.
Thank you. And for thank you for everyone for just giving me the space. I'm seeing texts come in. I'm not sure what they're saying. But for those of you who are new to the platform, Tria, thank you for hosting this conversation. Because I'm usually the interviewer, but I was like, you got to interview me because I don't know.
Sure.
And first thing I want to say is my name is Suzanne Hart. I am the Mindset Mastery Mentor. You can find me on Facebook at Suzanne Hart right here. On most of social media platforms, my handle is Suzanne Hart. Or you can connect with me at Suzanne at SuzanneHart.com. That's my email. And Suzanne is SUZAN and Hart is HART. Or my website is SuzanneHart.com. And I'm open to communication. I'm open to furthering this conversation because it is so necessary. I trust that this serves because that was my intention. And we will be back here next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tria, thank you so much. You're such a blessing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.